Ladies and gentlemen, our third speaker of the evening. She holds a bachelor's in food and fermentation science from Oregon State University and a doctorate in food science from North Carolina State. From FoodWit, please welcome Dr. Jennifer Fideler Moore.
I'm just wondering if that guy's up for hire to announce my voicemail. He says yes. It's kind of like a wait, wait, don't tell me, but way
I have
better.
actually done voicemail for people before. It's true.
All right, that's cool because you're going to do it tonight. All right, so tonight I'm going to take you through a question that I know all of you have been wondering for most of your lives. If fermented fruits and vegetables are actually healthy. And we're going to dive right into fermentation. So lactic acid fermentation is a technology, a food processing technology, if you will, that has been used for thousands of years. This processing technology involves the use of lactic acid bacteria, and it transforms naturally occurring sugars like glucose and fructose into lactic acid. And that's how we get pickles from cucumbers, kimchi from kimchi from cabbage, and many other foods. Now, between 5 and 40% of the diet of all people across the world consists of lactic acid fermented foods. That's a lot of food. So we have lots of different foods that we eat on a regular basis, whether that's your morning coffee, your afternoon chocolate, cheese, olives, soy sauce, pickles, and all of these contain health benefits. And we typically think of fermented foods as being healthy because they contain probiotics or live microorganisms. But we're going to crush some dreams real quick here because most lactic acid fermented fruits and vegetables do not have probiotics and oftentimes undergo heat processing to ensure shelf stability. So pasteurization or maybe even sterilization if they're canned. So while we don't have live microorganisms in most of these foods, we do have bioactive compounds. So that means that we have chemical reactions that are happening during fermentation that leave the food with new compounds, either transformed or released from the foods. These compounds may be amino acids, bioactive peptides, vitamins, exopolysaccharides, neurotransmitters, the list goes on. Now, to demonstrate this difference, we're going to take a page out of my doctoral research. And yes, I am a pickle doctor. I will take questions later. So there are two types of pickles. There's fermented pickles, and there's acidified pickles. The acidified ones are the ones that we think about making at home a lot of the time, where we do a brine with vinegar. And then fermented, obviously, use lactic acid bacteria. Now, within these two types of pickles, we also have pasteurized or heat processed for shelf stability, and fermented or refrigerated, which maintain a much shorter shelf life. But of these four types of pickles, only the fermented refrigerated have the chance of containing live microorganisms, or I should say intentional live microorganisms. But both types of fermented pickles do contain higher amounts of bioactive compounds than their acidified counterparts. So when we look at these bioactive compounds, we're going to take two examples today. The first is bioactive peptides. So a bioactive peptide is a sequence of amino acids, usually about 3 to 6 amino acids long, and it is encrypted within a much, much larger protein. But this bioactive peptide is not active until it's released from that protein. So bioactive peptides can be antioxidant, they can boost your immune system, they can make you feel happier, they can fight cancer, they can combat blood clots. There's lots of different functionalities for these peptides, and we've found them in tons and tons of different fermented foods. So if we apply this concept to food, we look at wheat, and when wheat is made into sourdough bread, the proteins that are in that wheat are broken down by the lactic acid bacteria, and bioactive peptides are released. Those bioactive peptides stay in the bread even after it's baked. They're heat stable, which is much more than we can say for the microorganisms that did the work and died a quick and painful death in the oven. So that means even fermented foods that don't have live organisms have healthful compounds. The second example is ascorbigen. So ascorbigen is an anti-cancer compound, and It can be formed during fermentation of things like broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, mustard greens, anything of the brassica type variety. Fermentation helps this process in two different ways. First, there is an inactive precursor, glucobrasicin, that is physically separated from the enzyme myrosinase that is supposed to do the work on it. It's physically separated within the plant cell. But during manufacturing of certain fermented products like kimchi or sauerkraut, that cabbage is cut up and shredded, and those cells are broken down, and these two compounds are allowed to make contact and continue on to an intermediate. So you could chop your cabbage and get a little bit more of this, but fermentation really helps when it drops the pH into an optimal range for the final reaction. So scientists have found that cabbage that's been fermented contains 10 to 20 times the amount of this anticancer compound that raw cabbage or acidified cabbage might have. That's a big impact for these lactic acid bacteria. So we look at all these foods and we say, oh, they've got anti-cancer compounds, they've got antioxidants, it's going to lower your blood pressure, it's going to make you feel happier, it's got neurotransmitters in it. But we still have to ask ourselves, how do we know if eating these foods are actually going to improve our health? And the answer, as it is with most scientific studies, is that we need human trials. There is a significant lack of randomized controlled trials for fermented fruits and vegetables. And for the most part, these trials involve feeding humans purified, isolated compounds. Now, if you've thought about that, it means that we don't know what the effect of the actual food is. We know that the effect of one compound is, but we don't know how that food affects the release of that compound, how that compound interacts with other foods when it gets into your digestive system, or even if it actually makes it to the correct site of action. So what we really need to be doing is feeding people whole fermented foods. But food is complex, people are complex, these answers are difficult to come by. So, in coming back to our original question of, are fermented fruits and vegetables really healthy? My advice to you is to eat fermented fruits and vegetables, not because they contain probiotics, because they likely don't, but because they have significantly beneficial bioactive compounds that just might make you healthier.
All I'm saying is if you need a volunteer to eat all of the pickles and sauerkraut, I'm your guy. I'm your guy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have fermented some questions. Boo all you want, it only makes me stronger. All right, we'll start over here with a couple questions and make our way around the room. First in the back row, coming your way.
Yeah, I reflect on my sophomoric year of college many years ago when I woke up very hungover one morning. I reached in the refrigerator and grabbed what I thought was a jar of water, and it was a pickle jar. Everyone had eaten the pickles, but it was a dill pickles jar. And I drank a couple gulps of dill pickle juice before I realized it was dill pickle juice. And I don't know, for the next hour or so, I was burping from time to time and all that, but I realized that I'm recovering fairly quickly. Obviously, being hungover is dehydration and such. So could you briefly explain what the benefits of pickle juice, dill pickle juice, et cetera, and why it's found to be such a significant rehydrator? Thank you.
Yeah, so pickle juice, or pickle slushies if you've seen the frozen ones. I have tried those, absolutely disgusting. But, so oftentimes pickle juice is drunk by runners, and I know athletic trainers actually keep packets of mustard with them to help athletes overcome cramps in an immediate time because they have salt in them. So part of the therapeutic effect of drinking a brine, so a water and salt type beverage, is you basically had dill Gatorade is what you were drinking. But if it had pickles in it, that means that anything that was water soluble would have leached into that brine as well. So we've found that the brine of fermented products often contains bioactive compounds along with the fruit itself, cucumber being a fruit. But yeah, so amino acids, sugars, things like that are going to leach into the brine as well. So you may have been onto something.
That said, Dill Gatorade is my rap name. All right, next question right up here in the front row.
So I was interested in your discussion of kimchi because I've spent a lot of time in Korea and I married a Korean gal and I eat a lot of kimchi. And the Koreans don't just eat kimchi, but a lot of their fresh side dishes are fermented also. But they also have a high, and you mentioned that kimchi and others, this bio whatever, is anti-cancer agent. But they do have a higher incidence of stomach cancer. So I don't know if you're aware of that, and you know.
I am familiar with kimchi in the sense that there are a lot more studies that come out of Korea on the health benefits of kimchi. There's actually been some randomized controlled trials of feeding people kimchi and looking at weight loss. But I haven't looked into stomach cancer as much. And it's interesting, I will point out with kimchi, there's also fish sauce added, or fish or some sort of like higher protein material added in that fermentation, which is going to provide more material for the formation of bioactive peptides. So really it depends on what you mix together, and there are so many different types of either regional or national dishes that are fermented, especially throughout Southeast Asia.
Kimchi slaps, if we're being honest. All right, next question over here.
Thank you. So, fermented beverages and functional, probiotics and functional beverages is, growing a lot. So I wanted to see, how do you see, maybe more on the processing side, but how do they have probiotics in shelf-stable beverages? Is it more of just like a marketing thing on the label, or is it, if it's not added afterwards, how are they able to kind of process that and keep some of those probiotics into that fermented beverage, whether it's kombuchas, vinegar drinks, whatever?
Yeah, that's a great question. So how are probiotics able to be present in shelf-stable foods? Well, it took us a long time to get there as food scientists. A lot of it has to do with technology and how those probiotics are prepared, whether they're encapsulated, how they're dried, how they are prepared in order to stay stable within that food and not either ferment it themselves or die. So there's a lot of technology going on there.
All right, any other questions? Raise your hand. Awesome. Also, as a reminder, our question treats are sunscreen. Please do not try to drink them. All right, next question right here in the front row.
Thanks. So what is your favorite brand of fermented refrigerated pickles that I could buy at like Harris Teeter?
Bubbies.
Nice. All
Easily.
right. Thank you.
Easily Bubbies.
Yeah, I'm taking notes on that one too. Any other questions about fermented food? We've got one in the way back. I will be heading back there for our final question about fermented foods. Get the last question here.
So I have a question about kimchi as well. So, I like to eat kimchi and I buy kimchi and it's expensive. So a couple of years ago I tried to make my own and then I got scared and I thought, could it go awry? Like, can you make kimchi that becomes dangerous? Like, is there something we should know as home kimchi makers that we need to watch out for?
Absolutely. I would say salt is your friend, first and foremost. You want to maintain the correct amount of salt. And sometimes there's a little bit of acid added at the beginning too. Sometimes when fermentations are started, we add a little bit of vinegar to help select for the right bacteria. But salt is really the key. Some resources like extension offices, I don't know if NC State has an extension office that would provide material on that. They should. But most states have some sort of resource for proper fermentation, canning, things like that, because it really is important what starting materials you're putting in there so that you don't foster growth of pathogenic organisms or really anything that would spoil it too. And if you're really concerned, get pH strips. That's really gonna help if you don't have a pH meter at home. And I don't. Who does?
Nobody wants sentient kimchi. We don't want that. Ladies and gentlemen, big hand for Dr. Jennifer Fideler Moore.